morning. You could probably do a little better than that. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah. Welcome. I know you've already had a fairly engaging and inventive morning, so I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to take you through this interactive workshop today. As was said, my name is Amara Hunt. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Programs at the Humphrey Group. The Humphrey Group is a Vancouver-based communication firm, and our mission is to support people to become better leaders, simply through how they communicate on a day-to-day basis. I'm thrilled to be here today with influencers and members of the business community, as well as to leaders, to talk about gender diversity and the greater sphere of diversity and inclusion in general. I know many of you are local, which means that many of you were likely downtown on Friday. Raise your hand if you were downtown on Friday. Okay, quite a few of you. Wonderful. At the Climate March. And what you will have noticed if you were there was that a huge proportion of the people who were in the street were young people. Kids. Kids like Greta Thunberg. Kids who are entering into these really bold conversations as a way to impact and influence change. Today, we live in a polarized world. Globalization has led to an access to information that we've never seen before. And that information includes facts and alternative facts. And again, what that leads to is a lot of polarization around opinion. And as leaders in this community, it's really important that we have the tools to be able to engage in these bold conversations, to challenge the status quo, to be able to think on our feet, and in those moments where we see something, be able to say something in a way that is healthy, in a way that supports us. The message I want to deliver to you today through this interactive session is this. Every time you communicate, you have an opportunity to lead, particularly to lead diversity and inclusion. So today, as it was said, this is going to be an interactive session. It's wonderful to come to events like this and to be inspired, but it's also really important that we leave with some tools that we can then use to take action. We have all these great ideas. Maybe you want to embrace being a champion of gender equity, of diversity and inclusion. Well, how do you do it, particularly when we're faced with a polarized world? So, our session today is going to focus on communicating with impact and learning the skills to support you to be able to have those conversations in a way that is authentic to you, in a way that works for your values and your beliefs, but also in a way that works for the people who you need to convince and the people who you need to motivate to change, think differently, act differently. No tall order, right? So we're going to begin by talking about this notion of mindset, adopting what we call the mindset of a leader. We need to adopt a specific mindset to be able to lead in bold conversations. People who are really strong communicators, who are great influencers, don't simply show up and, as we say, throw up. They show up with a specific mindset. They think in a certain way and approach communication in a very intentional manner so that when those opportunities present themselves, they feel confident in their ability to speak to their beliefs in a way that is really impactful. So we're going to start by talking about that. Then we're going to talk about this notion of confidence, how to share your ideas confidently. If you are in a tense conversation or a challenging conversation, if you're not showing up in a way that conveys confidence, it's really easy to tune you out. So how do we manage some of those communication habits that may be minimizing people's ability to hear us as leaders, hear us as influencers? How can we acknowledge those and then let go what we don't need to hold on to? Finally, we're going to get down to some brass tacks and craft a script. This is what we call the leader's script. It's a tool that the Humphrey Group has developed. And this isn't a movie script. This is not like these words and no others. This is a way of helping you to organize your thinking so that when you have the opportunity, you can communicate with clarity and intention. This is the tool that I want you to walk away with today, so that as we finish the conference, as we finish these sessions, not only do you feel inspired, but you're in a position to go and have that bold conversation that's been percolating in the back of your mind for a while. So let's start by talking about this notion of mindset. How do we lead in bold conversations by adopting the mindset of a leader? Well, first we have to think about what causes people to behave in the ways that they behave. People don't just do the things that they do out of habit. We may think we do. We may think we get up in the morning and have a cup of coffee because it's our habit, but in reality, there's something that underpins that behavior. So when we think about action and people acting in a way that perhaps doesn't support gender diversity or inclusion, it's not enough for us to simply say, don't do that. Do this instead, focusing solely on a new action. And oftentimes that's what happens. Don't drink coffee, drink tea. Well, maybe I'll do that for a few days, but the reality is I'm eventually going to go back to that nice cup of coffee, right? Regardless. So if we want to change the way people act, if we want to change how people engage with diversity and inclusion, and gender diversity in particular, we need to start with beliefs. People believe something, and that's why they behave the way they behave. So instead of saying, don't do this instead, we need to think about where are they coming from? What thinking are they bringing to the table that's causing them to behave in this way? And then focus on sharing thinking that then shapes new thinking. New beliefs drive new actions. It seems like a very simple concept, but unless we start from this place, we tend to simply just focus on action when really we need to be focusing on what do people believe to cause them to behave the way that they do, and how can we create some changes so they behave differently. We need to share thinking to shape thinking, and there are some really critical principles that come into this conversation, particularly when it's a difficult conversation, a bold conversation. And the first one is this. In bold conversations, you need to be strategic. Not every single conversation is going to warrant or be an appropriate opportunity for you to talk about gender diversity and inclusion. Now, that may seem counterintuitive to my key message, which is every time you communicate, you have an opportunity to lead. But that's just it. It's an opportunity. We've got Thanksgiving coming up. Perhaps you're hosting a family dinner. Uncle Bob and Aunt Sue are coming over. Maybe not as progressive about gender diversity. Is that your big moment around the table with the whole family? Maybe. Maybe not. So when you think about these opportunities, really think about which are the ones that you know that you can get some traction with. Only you know what are the appropriate opportunities and what are the ones that are really going to make a difference. Choose your battles. Once you've chosen your battle, I encourage you to be bold. So much of the time, we hear things, we see policies, and it gets to a point where you just roll your eyes or you throw up your hands and say, well, here we go again. But the reality that we face today is that we need to be bold. We need to challenge the status quo. And again, you get to decide what this looks like. This doesn't mean kicking down people's doors, right? If the door is already open, maybe you give a gentle knock and enter. But be bold. I encourage you to be bold. And too often, particularly when I'm working with senior female leaders, they think they're being bold, but really they're not being bold enough. There's a difference between being assertive and aggressive. And intention feeds into that. So I encourage you, be bold in when you challenge and who you challenge. You have to balance that with a level of respect. And this is a hard one, especially if you are in a conversation with someone you don't respect. When you hear someone saying something that is really problematic, and you think to yourself, well, wait a second, I don't even know if I want to be in this conversation. This person's a lunatic. This is when we need to be respectful. Not only because it reflects your integrity in how you want to show up, but also recognizing that we can't out-shout a crazy person. Right? That's not a bold conversation. That's just two people yelling into the abyss. So by being respectful, you're presenting an opportunity to actually have a conversation. In a conversation that may be problematic when I do this doesn't mean I agree with you. This means I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. You get to decide where you put your respect and where you don't. But I encourage you, if you want to have a conversation that drives change, it needs to be one that is rooted in some level of respect. Now, if you thought respect was bad, this one's even worse. Be positive. I'm fortunate enough to get to work with women leaders all over the world. And the amount of women who come to me and say, I am so sick and tired of being positive and leading the charge of diversity and inclusion. Does that resonate with anybody? Being positive is difficult? When I say positive here, what I mean is highlighting opportunity. Negativity puts us in a really static state. It tends to stop conversation. By being positive in these conversations, what we're looking to do is create opportunity, create a path forward. This doesn't mean you don't acknowledge what's wrong. It doesn't mean you don't speak negatively, but it does mean that when you're delivering clear and central messages, they are ones that highlight opportunity to move us forward. Channel a little bit of Elizabeth Warren here and say, why would you bother to go to all the trouble to be a leader just to talk about what you can't do and what you shouldn't fight for? That's what this is about. Highlighting opportunity that answers that question of what's in it for me. Because I truly do believe that equity is good for everybody. Use research. Use research. In this age of popular opinion and alternative facts, you have so much research at your disposal. And being able to point to the business case for gender diversity, being able to point to the case for inclusive leadership and its connection to engagement is really important, particularly if you're operating in the business community. So make sure that you are reading those articles, you're staying on top of the most current research, because if you can point to the facts, that is going to support your arguments when you have to have these challenging conversations. So let's start our actual workshop here. I'm going to give you a minute or two, and I want you to think about an opportunity that you have to influence or advocate for diversity and inclusion. This can be for gender diversity, diversity in general, or it can be for inclusion. This can be a past opportunity that when you reflect on it, you think, you know what, that was a good opportunity and I just didn't capitalize on it. Or it can be one that you know is coming up. So something as simple as I sit on a volunteer board, and I truly believe that we need to develop a policy that focuses and makes clear our stance on gender equity and leadership. So I want to have that conversation. Take a minute, and on a piece of paper, identify an opportunity that you want to work on for the rest of our session. Because this is where we're actually going to put some work in so that when you leave, you have something to deliver. I'm going to give you 1 minute, identify your opportunity. Okay, I hope everyone has one. I would be very surprised if you don't. So now that you have an opportunity that you want to focus on, before we put pen to paper, we have to get in the right mindset to begin to figure out, how do we shape thinking with confidence? How do I communicate confidently? And as I said before, if I'm in a challenging conversation and the person I'm speaking with doesn't believe that I'm confident in what I'm saying or how I'm saying it, it becomes really hard for me to influence them. So let's talk about how we can build some confidence as we head into these conversations, particularly if you are someone who is conflict averse, which many people tend to be. The first thing we need to do when we think about shaping thinking with confidence is start by considering your audience. Who are you speaking to? So take a look at the opportunity that you wrote down. Who's going to be in the room? Who is that person? Who are those people? And in the example that I gave you, coming up with a policy for gender equity, speaking to the board, I would say my audience is the board. And the board is maybe made up of 4 people. So who is that audience? And once you've identified that audience, start asking yourself, where are they starting from? What do they currently believe? Why would they believe that? What's needed to shift their thinking? And finally, is this the right moment? Is this opportunity that I've identified, is this the right moment? So maybe the board that I'm working with currently thinks that this whole gender diversity thing, diversity and inclusion, is a bit of a fad. It's not that important. Perhaps they believe that as a way to kind of protect themselves. They don't have to hold themselves accountable. And needed to shift their thinking, well, maybe they need to know more about the business case. Maybe that's what's going to move the dial on this thing. And finally, is my quarterly board meeting, is that the right moment? Or do I need to have some different conversations prior to that meeting? So only you know this. So make a couple of notes. Who's the audience, and what are some things that you know? What are some things that you can anticipate? Because this is what makes a good communication, not just me up here saying what I think, but catering what I think to your needs. Considering your audience is going to give you a lot of confidence, because it means that you can likely anticipate some of the challenges that are going to come up, and you can better prepare. Right? This isn't about memorizing exactly what you're going to say, but feeling confident that you know how to communicate in a way that's going to resonate with people. The second way that we can shape thinking with confidence is by avoiding minimizing habits. So if we think about the audience as being part of that mental preparation, the other piece is, how do we show up in the moment? Minimizing habits are habits that I fall into that make me appear less confident when I'm speaking. So for example, maybe I know that when I'm under pressure and I'm having a difficult conversation, my body language tends to get a little bit less confident. Maybe I start doing one of these. Right? Maybe I do one of these. I'm really cold, but in reality, that's not what my audience sees when I do this. Nor when I stand off to the side with this. I'm just trying to relieve my passenger here. Relieve that, but really what my audience needs is this. So find a partner at your table, and if you have odd numbers, make a group of 3. And I want you to identify some communication habits that you know undermine your ability to come across as confident. We're looking here at polarizing conversations, so think about conflict. Is there something you know that you do when you get into a conflict situation where you don't feel as confident that you fall into? A habit. Maybe it's a bit of upspeak. Maybe it's weak body language. Maybe I start speaking really quietly. Okay, 2 minutes, have a discussion. What are some communication habits that we want to avoid in having these bold conversations? 2 minutes. Okay, let's bring it back in. People tend to like this conversation because you know what you're doing, right? You know the things that you're doing that aren't serving you. All right, so we're all friends here. You're getting to know each other. I already alluded to the fact that speaking at a level of volume is a good sign of confidence. What's something that you see people doing when they are not as confident, a minimizing communication habit? Shout it out. Oh, one of these? I really avoid this because that's how the rats move in, you know? Playing with your hair. Playing with your hair, maybe? Yeah? Similar to playing with stuff in your pockets, maybe? Okay. Over-agreeing. Okay, over-agreeing. Okay, One more? Laughing. Oh, nervous laughter. Oh, it's so uncomfortable. Playing with your phone. Yeah, so these are tells. And someone like me is trained to see tells. And whether or not your audience knows what you're doing that's indicating a lack of confidence, they know you're doing something weird. And it's disconcerting. And again, it distracts from your message. So it's really important that we recognize the things that we're doing that don't help us convey confidence. Anything you're doing that's not supporting your message is detracting from it. So here's a couple of big ones. Lack of clarity. Making an argument that is circular, round and round and round and round and round, talking too much, trying to justify and justify and justify. So being clear on what you want to say and the argument you're making is really important. As important is the type of language that you choose to use. Now, language isn't inherently bad, it's a construct. However, there is language that better reflects your intention. And often when we use hedging language, minimizing language, like maybe, I think, I'm sorry, but, I could be wrong, but, this kind of language sends a signal to our audience as to how confident we feel about what we're saying. Versus strong language like I believe, I'm confident, I'm convinced. So this isn't about good or bad, this is about being intentional. If you truly believe that equitable policies in the workplace benefit everyone, don't say, I think equitable policies in the workplace benefit everyone, because it's something you believe. So language is a really important one, focusing on using intentional language. And then finally, presence skills. How you connect what you say to how you say it. Because depending on what study you ascribe to, 90% of what you're saying ain't coming out of your mouth. So we talk about body language, standing straight, standing square, using our gestures. Eye contact, making conversational eye contact, not just zooming the friendly face in the room until they're so uncomfortable they have to leave. Pace, speaking at a pace that works for your audience, which also works for you because it means you can breathe. If you're someone who gets a lot of tension up here, when you are speaking, chances are you're speaking at a rate that is too quick. And finally, expression. What you're doing with your facial expression, and also what you're doing with your voice. Are you falling into that upspeak trap? That's a real killer. So recognize that these are some things that we want to be really aware of in these bold conversations. When the pressure is on, we want to make sure that we know what our tells are, because those tells distract and detract from what we want to say. And if someone is already very suspicious of this whole gender equity thing, they're going to fall into focusing on these things instead of what you are there to say. So those are some ways we can convey confidence. That's the mindset that we need to start with. Now let's start looking at some scripts, some ideas that are going to help you organize your thinking so that you feel confident in these conversations. In front of you, you have a script as a sheet of paper. It should be part of your materials. And it looks something like this. Please take that out if you haven't already done so. As I said, this is not a movie script. It is not these words and no others. This is simply a way of organizing your thinking so that you communicate with clarity and intention. I'm going to walk you through at a high level what these concepts mean, and I want you to start thinking about building out your script. I'm going to give you some time to do that, but first I want to introduce you to some concepts. At the top of the script, we have a grabber. A grabber is exactly what it sounds like, something to grab the attention of your audience. You can think of it as a verbal handshake, but it's the soft landing into the conversation. We have a subject. You should always speak with a subject, particularly if you are presenting. People don't walk away from presentations and say, oh my, that was really clear. I wish that had been a little less clear for me because I really understood what was going on there. Subjects are important. That little box that shows up in your email that shames you if you try and send an email without a subject, that's how attached to a subject you should be in your conversations. Clear message. We're going to talk in depth about what it means to have a message. This is the main thing that you need to say. This is the belief you need to share in order for your audience to take that step forward and change their thinking in a way to change their behavior. Use your best points. Not all of your points, sometimes one point will do, and then finally close with a call to action. So I'm going to walk you through each of these points using a specific example. And the best way to use an example is not a presentation, but of course a conversation. So this is a conversation that is going to be initiated by a comment someone is going to say. And here's the comment. I can tell some people are a bit disappointed that our new VP of sales is another white male on an already all-male leadership team. But here's the thing. We have to hire the most qualified candidate for the job. Cue the groans. That should make you groan. So, we can groan, we can roll our eyes and leave the room, or we can have a bold conversation. So we're going to start with a grabber. A grabber is supposed to create connection here. It's supposed to set the tone for the conversation so that your audience is at minimum willing to hear what you have to say. Maybe they're not going to agree with you, but at least they're going to hear you. I've got a 2-year-old, so I really love this image. I see this a lot. This is about getting the mind into a frame of being that is open. And if someone is coming in with an inflammatory statement, you may need to do some work before you start convincing them. So your grabber, in addition to creating connection, can do things like acknowledge perception. Maybe this person has a perception of what's going on that isn't real, or a perception that's not aligned with how that's being received. You can talk about objections, emotions, and as appropriate, intent. So based on what you heard about the most qualified candidate for the role, here's how we could use a grabber. You're right. Hiring the best candidate for the job is what is going to keep our business competitive. Nothing takes the wind out of someone's sails like you're right. Now, it doesn't mean you're right about everything, but you can be right about one thing. But just hearing that language at times gets people to settle in and at least be open to the conversation. Current research by Catalyst shows diversity on leadership teams is linked to superior business performance, which is also critical. I'm going to use some research here that I know is going to resonate with this audience. I want to share that when you frame a new hire in this way, it creates the impression that you don't think women and diverse groups are as qualified as men to work as a VP of sales at this company. So notice I've done a little bit of legwork before I've gone in and said this is the impact of what you've just said. And this part is very optional. I don't think that's what you intend. I wouldn't use this unless you're sure that's not what that person intended. But this is a way to open a conversation to keep it healthy. I've set the stage now where I can drive and offer a single message. A message is going to help shape the thinking. Strong messages need to square with the facts. They need to reflect your conviction. They need to convey clarity, and they need to highlight that positivity, that opportunity that I talked about. In this scenario, here's what a great message sounds like. I believe this situation presents us with a great opportunity to review our hiring practices with an eye for diversity and inclusion. It's simple, it's succinct, it's to the point. I haven't let this person get away with what they've said, which is fairly offensive. But instead of just focusing on the offense, I'm now showing a path forward. So what? The message is the so what question. Maybe we're going to use a good point as well. Given we know that there are diverse candidates who are qualified to take on leadership roles in our business, we should examine our practices and policies and see if they're inadvertently missing them. Great. Finally, we want to end with a call to action. A strong call to action should be assigned, concrete, and time sensitive. Let's plan to do something about this is not a call to action. Certainly not a good call to action. A stronger call to action would be, I'd be happy to share some catalyst research on the financial returns of diversity in leadership. Would this interest you? And if so, I'll be sure to follow up next week so we can chat further. That's a good script. That's a great way to enter a conversation. And the way we've done it is by investing some time up front in that grabber to create connections, hold the person accountable, share some research, so that we then have license to have that message to move the conversation forward. So here are some prompts for you as you start thinking about your script. Great way to start your grabber. I want to share. You're right about something. If they're not right about anything, don't say you're right. I can understand according to the research. Messages. Messages should begin with I'm confident, I believe, I'm convinced, because that's where it reflects your conviction. Your thinking is going to shape their thinking to drive new action. Finally, call to action. What do you think? I can send some information, I can book a follow-up. So I'm going to go through another one quickly, and then let you focus on developing your own script here. As a male, I can't mentor women in this day and age. It's just too risky. After Me Too, I just feel like I'm going to inadvertently offend someone or be accused of something I didn't intend. Grown, eye roll, okay? And I've heard this one a lot. I have. And it's challenging because I see a lot of women reacting in that way and not having the conversation. When we talk about allyship, when we talk about supporting the community as a whole and creating a more equitable environment, these are the opportunities that I encourage you to take on. You don't have to. You don't have to. But recognize that every time you have a conversation that is healthy in response to a comment like this, you're taking that next step forward. You're helping to shape someone's thinking. So what do I do in this situation? Well, open with a grabber. That creates that common space that concedes. Yes, you're right, standards of conduct have changed with Me Too. There are certainly more accountability being asked of everyone, and we all need to figure out how to navigate this new reality, men and women alike. I'll stand by that. And that's something that, again, I'm giving to this person. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, where I think is appropriate. But guess what? Choosing not to mentor women could be viewed as discrimination based on sex, which is illegal. So I'm not letting you off the hook here, but I'm not starting with both barrels. I'm laying that foundation to open up your mind so that at minimum you can hear the research, you can hear the facts. And then I'm going to follow it up with something else that I believe, which is that you're a great mentor, and it would be a shame for women not to benefit from your knowledge. My message to you is, I'm confident that having open conversations that provide feedback on communication and conduct is a great way to navigate these changing realities. Here's the so what. Here's the way forward. I'm going to close with that call to action, which is I respect you, if I actually do. If I don't respect you, I'm not going to say that. I'd be happy to book some time to provide you with feedback in the coming weeks. How would you feel about that? Additionally, I'd be happy to share an interesting article on changing norms following Me Too with you. This is one of those things where you get to decide what the intention is. You can decide whether or not this person who is making this comment is blissfully unaware, perhaps they are being intentionally offensive, or perhaps you're not sure. You decide how to navigate these situations. Using this kind of structure is going to be really helpful for you. So what I want you to do now is start crafting your script. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to start pulling together your script. Use these prompts and start thinking about what would you do and what would you say, how would you organize your thinking for this upcoming opportunity in a way that resonates. Go ahead, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning. One more minute. Okay, I see a lot of furious scribbling. That's good. Remember, it's not a movie script. It's about ideas. If this seems difficult and confusing and challenging, it should. Okay. This is a skill that I take a lot of time working with leaders to develop, to understand each of these pieces. In front of you, you also have a booklet that goes through these concepts in greater detail. And I encourage you to review it after our session or in the coming days to solidify some of this information. Again, the idea here is the grabber sets the tone for the conversation. The message is what conveys your belief. I'm confident, I'm convinced, I believe. Using your points and having that call to action. It's one of the really nice things about using a structure like this is that means you don't have to memorize what you are going to say word for word. You're just memorizing the ideas that you want to bring to the table. So, given your script, we're going to do an exercise now where you're going to have the opportunity to share. I want you to think about one piece of pushback that you need to be ready for. So in my example of coming up with a gender diversity policy for senior leaders, the piece of pushback that I may get is, this isn't a priority right now. We've got too many other things on our plate right now. So just be prepared. What are you likely to get pushback on? It always amazes me when I talk to leaders and I say, well, what happened there? I got this question, I wasn't prepared for it. Well, if you had thought about your pushback, if you had thought about your audience, could you likely have anticipated that question? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is yes. So because you've done this work on your audience, you know likely how they're going to react. So how can you prepare for it? In your table groups now, I want you to share your script. Notice that it's not polished. It's not supposed to be perfect. There's no perfectionists in this room, I'm sure. In pairs or in a group of 3, I want you to walk your partner through your script. And even as they're walking through the script, the listener, the partner, keep an eye out. Language, presence. Are they using hedging language? Are they using weak presence as they talk about it? This is not about perfection, it's about practice. Okay? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'll let you know when to switch, but start talking about these great conversations because you may get ideas from other people of other conversations that you want to have. Okay? Find your partner, start talking through your script, what you're going to talk about, what your key message is, and start thinking about that piece of pushback as well. Go ahead. If you haven't yet switched, let the other person have a go. All right, everybody, 30 seconds, and I'm going to get you to bring it back in. So sounds like there's some really good conversations going on. And what I love about this is that it means you can continue the conversation. You're likely hearing things that you haven't thought of. Maybe you're hearing some things that you have thought of, but you want to say differently. As I said at the beginning of our session, every time you communicate, you have an opportunity to lead. This is just one of many tools that you can use, but I encourage you to use it so that you can build confidence. This is about leading in bold conversations. These conversations are not easy. So the more support you have, the more clarity you have, the more confidence you have in what you believe, in what you want to take forward from conferences like this, the more action is going to be taken. This is an opportunity for us all to shape thinking and make positive change, but we have to lean into those engaged conversations. We need to be bold, and we need to make sure that we're communicating with clarity and intention. As you leave this session in the next few days, I want you to deliver your script. You put the work in, refine it, deliver it, make it happen. Practice using the tools that you have in front of you. This is a great thing to work on, whether or not it's a bold conversation. Being a strong communicator can support you in all of your endeavors. And finally, continue to be bold. This is what this whole day is about. Being bold, connecting to change, and pushing the change that you want. If you want to learn more about having conversations in diversity and inclusion, we have a great podcast. I encourage you to check it out. Really appreciate you welcoming me here today, and thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the sessions today.